Hello everyone, I'm Alessandra, and today we are here to welcome you to a new episode of People Also Ask and We Answer, the interview series of Clearbox AI. A few interviews ago, we had the chance to talk with Marina Gemona about how to harness the power of AI in companies, and in particular about the importance of data strategy to do these processes. And so today I'd like to go deeper on that to understand how it's done in practice, how we work on data strategy in companies, and what's the role of data teams in it. And I'm happy to do it with our two guests for today, Alberto Danese, Head of Data Science at Nexi. Hello, Alberto. Thank you for being here today.
Hello, everyone.
And Luca Gilli, CTO at Clearbox AI. You already know him.
Hello.
So, Alberto, before we start, you would like to maybe introduce yourself a bit and tell us about your work?
Well, thank you very much also for inviting me in this discussion, in this talk. I'm Alberto. I'm the Head of Data Science in Nexi. I've been working there for 3 years, and a half. Well, I lead a team of data scientists and data engineers that work every day with payments data as Nexi is a leading in this field.
So let's start. And I will start with you, Alberto, asking the first question, which is, why is it important to create a company data strategy?
Well, I think that in the last few years, companies have realized that data is an asset. It's really a strategic asset. It's very difficult for a company to create a huge amount of data. But once you have this data, it's really not so easy to replace. It's really a strategic advantage that puts the company on a different level from the competition. Mm-hmm. If you think about, let's say, top 10 companies in the world, many of them actually are data companies. If you think about Google, for instance, I think that its major asset is really data. And it's not easy for another company to create that amount of data in a period of time. So once you realize that data is no longer just a source of information to support business, it's not just an ancillary part of your business, but it's the core of your business. Well, once you realize this, you definitely need to have a data strategy. So a strategy to grow, to manage data and to extract value from this amount of information. In the last few years, many companies have started to realize this kind of thing. If I think of my personal experience, I work in a company that deals with millions of transactions per day, and data has always been used for operational reasons. Obviously, we have to produce the balance of credit cards, for instance. In the last few years, we started really to leverage this amount of information also for other purposes, for strategic ones, to drive the strategy of the companies, actually.
So since data strategy is so important, let's understand who takes care of it. So for example, in your experience, which are the roles in data teams that take care of these processes? And which one do you have in Nexi, for example?
Actually, 3 years ago, more or less when I joined, actually there's been a choice to define what we call data area. That really is a central unit made of 4 teams that deal with data from the different point of views. So it's basically made of four main teams. A team dedicated to architecture, so data architecture, that is everything that is related to not only storing, moving data across different systems. Then we have a core team that's responsible of the data warehouse. So it's responsible of everything that goes from reporting to some regular operation with data. Another team is responsible of the operations, because when data is really at the core of your business, you obviously have to take care of data. So data loading, data ingestion, data processing. So there is also a bit of operations involved. Despite all the automatic procedures, there is still the need someone who takes care of these procedures. And finally, there is the data science team that I lead that is actually dealing with data science activities, that is development of algorithms, data products, let's say, and insights, but also takes care also of some data engineering, especially on cloud in our case. And these are really the 4 teams that define the data area in Nexi. If I think of the professionals that are involved in these teams. I speak specifically of the one I lead. You can broadly divide the data professionals in two groups: the ones that are closest to the IT, and the ones that are closest to the business, let's say. When they have a good experience, they are usually able also to deal with the other side of working with data. So maybe you are focused on working with a specific business team. Most of your time you work with them, but you need to understand also a little bit of the engineering part, and the other way around. Because behind a single name, you can have actually different professions.
Competencies, yeah.
I discussed about this topic also in a that I wrote, that I published 3 months ago, that is called La Cultura del Dato, that is culture, that is published by Franco Angeli. I discussed with my co-author Stefano Gatti about the fact that, for instance, data scientist could have multiple meanings. It could be a researcher, it could be someone working close with the business. So again, I'm not a fan of introducing terms and professions, let's say.
I think this also depends on the kind of company we are talking about, and also which tools do they use, because I think it's interesting to understand which tools they use and which tools do you suggest to do a data strategy in a company.
No matter if you are working mostly with the engineering part, with the IT part, or with the business side of working with data, any person that has a data something role, a data analyst, a data scientist, a data engineer, needs to be someone who uses technology. And I think we can really define 3 main areas of tools that you need to use. First of all, obviously, development tools. In my experience in Nexi, the vast majority of our code base is written in Python, Spark as well. So Python and Spark are really the 2 pillars, let's say, of our work. And obviously all the software that sits around the development languages. So for instance, the development environment, the IDE, and the versioning tools like Git, and so on and so forth. Then you have, I can call them computational tools. So in Nexi, we did this choice 3 years ago of adopting the public cloud. And it's been, for our need, a great choice because we have access to many tools, to scalable, let's say, CPU and computational power. Some other groups maybe decide to work on premises, but I think nowadays choosing the cloud as a computational platform is almost a must for data scientists and for anyone that works with data. And last but not least, we have a set of let's say, compliance and security tools. So for instance, we have security tools to obfuscate data, or access control tools to limit the access to data, and tokenization tools, cryptography tools, anything that is needed to, let's say, create a sort of limit to the data that you can access. I think this is fundamental because it's very important to take care of these security measures. Obviously, if I work in a company, in a manufacturing company, and if I work only with IoT data, probably there are not so many problems in accessing data produced by a machine. But when data is produced by a person, it's a completely different matter.
Yeah, in fact, we know something about personal data in privacy compliance. So thank you, Alberto, for this overview. And in contraposition to that, I would like to ask, what about the tools for small companies or startups?
First of all, I would like to say, maybe I would like to talk from the perspective of small startup. Nowadays, you hear about startups with 1,000 employees, which is, in my opinion, big companies, but from the perspective of a small startup, so maybe 10, 20 employees, it's an interesting point of view because you can make, you're more flexible to make interesting choices about tools and technological stacks because you are less limited. In my opinion, the first choice would be like if you're using a cloud infrastructure, whether to use native tools provided by the cloud providers like Amazon, Google, Microsoft all provide data processing extraction tools that are native in their platform, or you can build them by yourself. And sometimes it's advantages to start using their tools because first of all, as a startup, you have access to cloud computing credits, and it's an easier learning curve to start using these tools rather than started building everything from scratch. But on the other hand, you're eventually locked in to a certain cloud provider, for example. And from a startup point of view, another very interesting aspect is that nowadays there's really a lot of new libraries, open source libraries and tools focusing on data, which is extremely interesting. And we can start experimenting a bit more maybe compared to a more structured company. Mm-hmm. So instead of say using Airflow for data orchestration, you might experiment with a new tool such as Daxter, which is being created 2 years ago. Which is really interesting. On the other hand, it presents some risks because there are so many tools that it's not always trivial to determine which tools will still exist in 2 years' time, for example. So every time you start this kind of experimentation, you might find yourself with a very powerful and modern and efficient tool. On the other hand, there's a risk that people will not use it on a mass scale. And in my opinion, these are the big aspects when talking about tools related to data from a startup point of view.
So we did an overview for big and small companies and startups. And now I would like to come back to the world of data scientists. Asking you, Luca, what are the obstacles that data scientists may encounter along data pipelines?
Going back to what Alberto was saying about roles and figures, when you're in a smaller company, this kind of definition are even more blurred because sometimes data scientists have to be data engineers. And as data engineers, in my opinion, the most important aspect is that data is always integrated in software. So we really need to adopt the same best practices we adopt in software to write good data pipelines, which is writing proper data documentation, data versioning, and data testing. As Clearbox, I think we had a lot of contacts with organizations working on these data pipelines. And one of the main issues was about testing, because you need to be, when you version data and also when you automatically deploy new data pipelines, you need to be able to constantly test it to make sure you don't break anything, that you're actually improving your pipelines. And when you have to test on personal data, it's not really trivial to come up with this kind of data. So as a synthetic data provider, we really had a lot of data that depicts, for example, people, but is less affected by risk of identification, for example. But in general, I think this kind of, the same best practices that you would adopt when writing good software should be implemented while writing good data pipelines. And it's really, really difficult.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I also can imagine this is just one of the pitfalls that data scientists may encounter along data pipelines. So, well, I guess we come to the end of the interview. So thank you very much for all your very interesting point of views. And so to wrap it up, we talked about data strategy and its importance in companies. The roles inside data teams and the roles of data scientists in particular, the tools that we can use both in big and small companies, and the obstacles that data scientists may encounter along data pipelines. So I hope this introduction can be useful for companies who are thinking about implementing new data strategies, or they are still implementing it and are interested in the topic. But I would like also to know the thoughts of data scientists. So data scientists, if you have something to add or to share with us, please let us know in the comments. And in the meantime, thanks for watching. And I hope to see you soon to the next episode of People Also Ask and We Answer.